Yes. Nice. So you were saying that you were referencing the post that I made the other day when I was in the weightlifting room and I was deadlifting and I noticed my own reaction to somebody else coming into the room. And I kind of
Hmm.
like spelled out the narratives that I had go through my head and the emotional reaction that I had to those narratives and how
Yes.
that's tied to past experiences. And it's funny because I got that was just like a spur of the moment thing that I did. I didn't, it's not something that I normally do, but it's a practice that I have and it's a practice that I teach. I've developed a system of uncovering these kind of narratives. And,
Mm.
but I didn't really think about it. I was just like, oh, this is something that I do all the time. I might as well just share it real quick. And I got an enormous response from people. People really related to it. And I was like, wow, that's amazing. It's really cool.
That no, it was so cool to see you post. And did you know at the moment you'd filmed it, and then later you were like, "Oh, I'm going to go look at the video," or how did that come about?
Yeah, it was more like I did the practice and I had the realization while it was happening in the moment. And then when I went back and watched the video, I was reminded, I was like, oh yeah, that's actually a thing that I could share and it might be cool.
Mm.
Yeah.
How did you recognize you went from fear to anger? That was what really impressed me as well.
Oh yeah. Well, it's mostly just emotional cues, paying attention to how the emotions feel in the moment. So like for me, fear feels very different than anger. Um,
Hmm.
and I've used sort of more physical tactile cues or sort of embodied cues to help me to recognize and identify those emotions. So like in the system that I've developed, I kind of have divided the negative emotions into 5 categories. They're more just like labels. There are lots of different emotions that can fit under the categories, but the
Hmm.
categories are fright, fear, anger, sad, and physical pain. Um, and then
Excellent.
so those, all of those categories for me have very different feelings, and I've learned to figure out which one feels like what, basically. Yeah.
That's really impressive. I really think the keys to a lot of life is in understanding emotions and to do that for yourself. One of the things I said to you in that, this is reflecting back at me, um, is that anger is a cover-up emotion
Yeah.
for the fear. So fear is something we've kind of trained ourselves to not allow ourselves to fear,
Hmm.
especially as guys. We're almost scared or ashamed to feel fear, especially around people. So we have this anger as a cover-up which kicks in to protect us from fear. Another thing I mentioned was that um, anger is when addictions aren't met, and you disagreed at that point because you didn't. I didn't elaborate enough, I think, to make it clear. And I think what it is a lot of us have emotional addictions in terms of expectations we put on everyone around us, our family, strangers in the street, guys in the gym. When those expectations aren't met, those addictions that people require must meet our requirements of how they act.
Mm.
Then we have different ways of expressing that, and it can be anger or comedy or some way to control the situation to make them act in the way that meets our addiction and needs that we expect from them.
Yes. Yeah, and now after we had gone a little bit deeper into that conversation, and now hearing your explanation now, it definitely makes sense where you're coming from. And you know, something that I find as a self-assessment, I tend to be a very analytical person, and I studied philosophy and psychology. So when I hear generalized statements,
Yeah.
the first thing that I do is I go and look for exceptions. And so when I heard that statement, my brain immediately jumped to like, okay, what might be some exceptions to that rule? So I tested your hypothesis and was kind of like, okay, if anger is a reaction to an addiction not being met, can I find any cases that don't exactly fit that general description? And
Sure.
and I came up with some. I for sure came up with some, but this is something that I'm working on as my own communication practice. Is
Mm-hmm.
just because a rule has exceptions doesn't mean that the rule is not valuable and doesn't give us insights. And so
So was it an example of feeling anger but without an expectation not being met, or was it an example of, yeah, okay.
yeah, oh yeah. So, oh, you mean what were the exceptions?
Yeah. Was it to do with the anger, or was it to do with the emotion, or the? Sorry, this is, they're saying it's echoing as well. Is my audio playing through your laptop?
Yes, it is.
Could you mute it?
Yeah, I can. Hold on. Yes.
Let me check that now.
How about now?
No feedback. Okay,
Hey.
there we go. Okay,
All
right, we can plug in now. Okay, cool. So, you want to go into an example, or were you going to go on to something?
Yeah, we'd love to. As a general rule, the exceptions that I find is that, so what I agree with what you said, and what I think is a really great insight, is that anger is the cover-up emotion.
Mm-hmm.
And it happens when it's not only when we feel fear, but also when we feel sad or pain, or any of the other emotions. So I agree with that insight, and I think it's tremendously valuable, because that helps people to know that when they're feeling anger, the anger is not the direct cause of an event. It's a reaction to a reaction.
Resistance. Yeah. They're resisting the real emotion, and it's really a habit that we've got into. And for me, it comes back to the 3 pillars of spirituality, which is, and I can share what I've studied and stuff to learn this from later, but are humility, truth, and love. And humility, really, people think of it as being, someone bowing back and whatever. But in the broader, more important sense, it's being humble to our emotions. And being humble to our emotions mean feeling them to their fullest extent without resistance, suppression, cover up. And so when we are so that is the question really, was going to be, you recognize that anger is the cover up for different emotions. But when have you felt anger and it wasn't, you don't think it was a cover up in some sense?
For me, I find a hard time finding exceptions to that rule.
Okay. Yeah, that's what I was wondering, which way around it was. To that, you agree with that?
Yeah.
It seems pretty, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that seems really sound to me. I mean, unless I just haven't thought about it hard enough, and I've thought about it pretty hard. So, So what I did find exceptions to was the anger as an emotion being characterized as not an addiction not being met, because sometimes those other emotions that anger is a cover up for, they're just kind of visceral reactions to a situation, and those can happen without expectation. So if I, for example, am surprised by something and I feel fright, like something scares me and comes out from a corner, I didn't really have any expectation that might happen, but I still immediately after that, if I cover that up with the anger response, that can still happen. And there's no real, I mean, you might say that if you really wanted to stretch it, you might say that the expectation is that nothing surprising was going to happen, right?
And that's really, in the truest sense, is that and that's a great example. It is a great example to get into the weeds of it. It's to do with, if someone punches you in the face, for you to punch them back is unloving, and for you to expect someone not to punch you in the face is unloving in a sense. Even though it's unloving that they would punch you, it's still unloving to hold an expectation that they should not punch you. And that may seem extreme to some people, and you can much more suffer examples of, you expect someone to give you a hug and they don't give you a hug, and then you feel hurt by that. And it's like, oh, well, that's you having the expectation. It doesn't mean that they don't love you. That could be from your own issues, your own traumas, however you carry that. But I understand someone could make you jump and then you feel angry, but and there could be a trauma from your childhood where and I had one from my older sister made me jump, and sometimes I feel jumpy. And I'm like, is that from that moment back then? And if you never had that and you were just walking around life and someone could jump out and you might not flinch. Some people don't flinch, right? Have you ever seen some people things can pop out and they have no flinch reaction because there's no history of that being surprised in that sense or something. And it's very person to person.
It is.
But
that's
like
true.
you say, I think we kind of agree on that, but it's like, it really is in the weeds, as we're,
Yeah, and I think so. Then I guess the exceptions that I would take then are even more specific, where it would be more of the instinctual kind of reaction where, like you say, it may still be very individual, but like even if I have no past trauma in my life with spiders or snakes or anything like this, or or small animals that might bite me. If I'm walking in the bush, you know, and I look down and it's kind of dusk and I see a shadow come out and I jump for no particular reason. And I never grew up in the bush. I never like was around animals. I think we do have some of these kind of biologically ingrained instincts. And then the anger can arise on top of that, but we might be splitting hairs at this point. I don't know. Yeah.
That's cool. It's good to discuss though. I think it's great to discuss.
Yeah. So, I mean, man, it seems to me like you spent a lot of time thinking about introspection and applying it in your own life. And you said some things during our chat on direct message that I really heavily agreed with. Like you said at one point, I took a screenshot here.
Sure.
Yeah.
And we can share anything in that I message you. I'm fine to share publicly, by the way.
Oh yeah. I wasn't planning on sharing anything personal.
No, I know, but just there was conversations we had where I talked about my traumas and certain things that were.
Oh, okay.
That you know, if you wanted to go there, I don't know what you want.
Sure, good to know. But it was, thanks for that. But it was more of a general statement that you made about practice. And this is something that I find to be a really prevalent issue, particularly, I mean, that's why I kind of wanted to address this publicly as well, because I think so many people are going to benefit from this. You said, I haven't known anyone else really to commit to this level. And you were talking about like emotional awareness at this point. You said a lot of talk about emotions and mental health world today, which is great. Just not to the intensity that this requires for those who want lasting change. And this is something that so I don't know if you know, but I've dedicated a lot of the last 8 years or so to developing this practice that I call narrative excavation, which is essentially aimed at solving this problem that we have a culture which talks a lot, increasingly more and more and more, especially with the advent of New Age spiritualism and yoga becoming popularized. We have this culture that's talking more and more about mental health, about spiritual practice, about emotional awareness. And you hear lots of people, especially on Instagram, giving advice. And it concerns me because, like you say, it feels like there's no real practical system for helping them to implement lasting change. And so I share that concern with you, and I'll let you respond to that. Sure. But then I have more questions.
I think there's a lot of circling the mountain, right? Like we all want to grow and heal and feel better, but truly the things we're most scared to face are our own emotions, and we do everything in everyday life to make ourselves comfortable and avoid what makes us feel sad, uncomfortable, angry. We do our best to avoid these things and create a life around us where people meet our emotional addictions, in a sense that, and there's something that is really important to understand, is that, you know, we have friends that agree with us on most things that we think about, our partners, and there's so much talk. Like I've done so much soul searching in terms of my life, and I've achieved a lot on a commercial. Like if I can go into a bit of my history, and not to in any way brag, although how it comes out is how it comes out. That's how people receive it. I've done I've won world championships, right, in free running, Ninja Warrior. I've had a 6-figure year. I've got an 8-pack. I've dated celebrities, flown the world. And that's all like the mainstream, like chasing these goals, right? Then I've done like yoga for 8 years, meditation. I've fasted for 35 days before. I've been raw vegan. I've been carnivore. I've done ultra marathons, like 100-kilometer races. I've done so much different practices from everything, right? CrossFit. I've done CrossFit, weightlifting. None of it made me any happier. Not one of those things overall. Maybe temporary moments. Nothing made me as my soul baseline better or grow. None of it. This is what so many people are circling. They're getting into these new practices and these things, and they feel better temporarily, and their body feels a bit more relaxed. But on a soul level, is what we're really after, is soul healing, and that only comes through emotions. How we connect to our soul is through the emotional channel. And the
Mm.
more we learn to suppress negative emotions with tools, alcohol, food, relationships, you know, and this is what we talked about, the more we suppress the negative stuff, the more it doesn't allow the genuine positive happiness, love to flow to us as well, because we block that channel. The same thing, negative emotions come down, and the same thing, positive emotions come down. And this is what I mentioned, right? And that you completely agreed. I know you've thought about this many times as well, but we're all just in this chemical emotions. We tried to forget our emotions chemically through, like we said, through sex, food, and exercise, where we get these dopamine rushes of happiness. Or we're feeling some addiction that makes us temporarily happy, but it's not that true childlike wonder happiness. And recognizing that all these people and all these practices, and seeing that none of them are really grow. There's not many transformations truly taking place when you look at a lot of teachers and people. There's a lot of new age spirituality, which kind of, there are people that do shine a bit more brighter, maybe, can we say? But there's a lot of, they call it forgetting emotions. They've forgotten their traumas rather than actually release them fully. And I just think I care about releasing the traumas, which emotion seems to be, in my own experience and practice since I've got into this a few years ago, and was what we talked about there, intensity being important. It's not just, it's being humble to the true emotions. And sorry, I know you've probably got quite a few questions. So it's getting to the true emotions and releasing those fully that seems to be the pathway to transformational life and more joy and more love in our lives.
Yeah, no, yeah, well said. There's a lot. I think there's a lot there that's working for me and that aligns with my experience. And yeah,
self-reflection being a huge part, right? You have to be open to that truth. So sorry, I'll jump in quickly, but the second point from humility, truth, and love. Humility leads us to truth, and there's two forms of truth. There's the truth of the universe, one universal truth, and then there's personal truth. Self-reflection leads us to personal truth, which is what the journey, I recognize you are fully on that journey of being humble enough to take personal truth, because you try and give people personal truth and they're not ready for it. They might lash out, they might put you out of their lives. You can deliver it, you can deliver personal truth to someone in an unloving way, which again isn't really, so it's, someone has to invite personal truth in. But does that make sense? You have those kind of,
yes,
humility leads to truth, and personal truth is what leads to growth.
And then the third category is love. Okay.
And that truth, personal truth, may be painful to take when you realize you've acted unlovingly a lot of your life, even though you think, a lot of parents think they were loving to their children, even though they beat them. And they said, I'm beating you because I love you. Yes. This is to make you act. And that's not love. So that you've created a problem in the child, but the parent did the best to their knowledge of what they believed they could, passing on, And so taking the truth of ourselves and how we've acted unlovingly and how we act unlovingly day to day, then we can start to correct it, and that will lead to more love. But without personal truth and being humble to personal truth, we can't get to that final stage of feeling that.
Wow, I find that really amazing, because you've said in a very different and unique way that obviously, like, we've never spoken before this, and I think we don't really even read the same authors. Like, you referenced someone before who you learned a lot of this kind of introspective practice from. I was not aware of it all. And so I find it really interesting that we've arrived at a very similar place. To use your language and say that we need to understand our own personal truth before we can understand why we're coming from non-loving action and how we can come from loving action. The way that's manifested in my practice that I've developed and that I practice myself and that I teach to my students is that the insight that I've had is that almost all of my non-loving actions are reactions to fear narratives that I've formed in response to traumas. And these fear narratives reliably fall into three categories. And for those of you who are familiar with my narrative excavation practice, I apologize for rehashing this same old point, but it's I'm alone, which is an isolating narrative. It means nobody understands, loves, or cares about me. I'm disconnected from other individuals. I can't be part of things. It's not because the world is wrong necessarily. It's not because I'm wrong. It's just isolated. It's just alone. The second category is I'm bad. And I'm bad is like a personal defect. You think there's something wrong with you, like something permanently defective in a way. Yeah. And then the third category is I'm not safe, which is a danger narrative. Is I'm in danger of not having enough resources, starving, not having shelter, people hurting me, so on and so forth. Like being in danger in some way, or experiencing threat. And so in my experience, all of these narratives that we form in response to a trauma that are preventing loving action fall into these three categories.
That's spot on. And I would, in my language, it's so funny, we're on the same thing, call them not feeling. The first one, being alone, is that's as it is. And then I'd say not the second one. What was the second one from you?
Alone, bad, and not safe.
Bad. You're not worthy of love. So bad would be we're telling ourselves we're not worthy of love. I'm a bad person. I'm not worthy of love. And then the third one, not safe, would be not loved. So not worthy of love and then not loved is like, I'm not safe. I'm not loved by the universe, by whatever. And the first one, alone, which brings me back. I don't know where your faith lies. I don't follow any religion, but I recognize a God, a creator of this place. That's how I've come to see that and believe that. And that is where I feel like society has gone so far off, because we're stuck in religious dogmas, or we're stuck in New Age spiritual movements, or we're in atheism or whatever, where it's just all chance happening, or the Big Bang Theory and this stuff. And this is why I feel like trying to pursue truth has led me to recognize a God, and that God, there is a creator, not a masculine or feminine, a most high, that loves us. And that is where we shouldn't feel alone. But because we're so removed from that place, we feel alone. So even without a partner or a friend, you can still not feel alone. But I don't know how you feel with that.
I just got a notification from Zoom saying that I have a gift from them. So hold on, it's blocking your face. It distracted me for a second. Can you say the last thing that you just said?
It was sort of a question to you, whether your spiritual or your practice, whether you, I don't know if you call it define it as spiritual practice, self-reflection, has led you to recognize a external force, a creator of this realm, kind of thing.
I don't know if it's so much a creator, like a conscious force, but there's some kind of like this is a realization that I had. I don't know if it's a realization as much as it is just a personal insight that I had back when I first started studying Nietzsche in university, and I read his book. I was a little bit dumb, like I jumped into his first. If you're familiar with Nietzsche, he has a lot of books, but the last book that he ever wrote was The Will to Power, and it wasn't really a book. It wasn't really finished. It was mostly fragments of thoughts, incomplete ideas, but it was essentially the skeleton of a masterwork that he was planning to finish before he died. But anyway, he ended up going insane and then dying. And he had quite a heavy life, but I appreciate that he was willing to power through and do what he did, because he left quite a legacy. Anyway, the will to power outlines what he considers to be the governing principle of all organic matter. And I'm not sure if that exactly summarizes how I feel about the whole thing, but what I do feel is that there is some kind of very real governing principle that is guiding organic matter, and perhaps even non-organic matter. And I don't know if it's a conscious entity or not, but if that's what you mean.
It's a question. I think it's good to, especially where everyone's trying to make you join a religion or believe this and believe that. I think you have to have conversations about how this place came to be, because I think what we're given with the Big Bang Theory has got so many holes in this like expanding thing, and everything just evolves. And I don't know, that's a whole other conversation in itself. But for now, I think, yeah, I don't know if you want to, we can focus back on the emotions, or if there's any other questions that you had coming into this.
Well, I think how this relates, you know, to how what you brought up about having a greater sense of some kind of creative force or governing principle in the universe. I think if we look for patterns in ourselves and in others, it will eventually lead us to broader and higher principles about how things work. It's like with movement, right?
Mm-hmm.
The more, I mean, and you're someone who's studied an incredible amount of disciplines over your life, and you've gone to a high level in many of them. And so I think you can testify that the more you sort of understand about how you develop your own personal truth, how you work as an organism, and then if you use that also as a source of compassion for understanding others and inquiring about others, and you know, we make that a practice of like trying to unpack the mechanisms that make us work. I think this practice and that path of inquiry will lead us more toward general principles. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, and the truth and answers. Yeah,
Mm.
But it takes, like you say, that real self-inquiry. And what is it Socrates or one of the Greeks? Know thyself, right? That quote.
Mm.
You know, that one, know thyself. The more you know yourself, the more you're able to, like you say, connect with others, because you can recognize in them the traumas and then not judge the traumas, because you know yourself have got your own things that you're working through. And it is really, yeah, knowing yourself can lead you to many answers. And I think that's what we both are probably on that path of asking, and probably many of the listeners here.
Right. That's true. And so I think for both for my own interest and for people listening, I think it would be worthwhile to go into, I mean, because you said it's so important that we have some kind of method or system or practice for creating lasting change.
Yes.
So what are some key things that you find that you do for that purpose? Because you said like the disciplines didn't do it for you. You know what I mean?
To me, this is what helped me to.
Oops.
Back, cool.
Yeah.
This is what helped me to recognize a creator, or some like force, as you say. Is there are laws that exist in this place that we live, this realm that we are, and a lot of these laws have been, I could say hijacked, maybe that's a bit of a rough word, but by spirituality. Things like law of attraction, right? Many of us probably read The Secret at some point, or went down that path of exploration. But we can certainly recognize patterns in our lives in friends that we have, and then they go out our lives, and another friend comes up that's quite similar to that last friend, and you're like, they're kind of similar, those guys. Or relationships that we have the same patterns of relationships and the same breakup patterns, or there's many patterns happening in our life, but yet different people have different patterns in their lives. And the more you know yourself, the more you recognize that, the more you have friends and you hear their stories, you recognize, well, yeah, you keep acting that way, this keeps happening to you. And there is for me, there's a law of attraction at play. But what I've learned and makes the most sense is that once I started doing the emotional work, is that it's not there to go think about money and money appears. It's not, it's the emotion. And if you dig deeper into like Greg Braden or someone, he starts talking about the emotion is the magnet that pushes or pulls that thought. And that makes sense, because if you try to think I'm rich, but in your heart, in your soul, you don't feel rich at all. You're just reminding yourself that you're not, and you're not being truthful about how you feel. So you're better off writing a post-it note saying I'm poor as fuck, and reading that every day and feeling poor as fuck. And when you actually feel, oh, I am poor, and you're truthful, then you are finally on the right path, because you're with the truth. And then you can feel that emotion of I'm poor. And once you felt that emotion truly, this is where in theory and what other people have experienced, but it's why it's so hard to be as intense as it needs to be, then what you attract changes through that practice. And so in my life, I said to you, that's kind of other issues, I guess, not so much law of attraction, but that or just like you're driving around and someone cuts you up in traffic and you beep and you give them a fuck you or whatever, that kind of thing. And the next day someone cuts you up and someone keeps cutting you up. And because, like we talked about earlier, you're projecting your own sadness. Your sadness is, I'm not in control. Someone else, I wasn't in control of that situation, and I tried to take control of my anger. That situation comes about again because I'm not being humble to the true emotion that someone makes me feel when they cut me up, and I'm trying to fight them back. And so it keeps happening. And so these things keep happening in our lives. The law of attraction is a law bringing about scenarios in our life to make us feel what we're not allowing ourselves to feel. That's an injury that's injured in our emotions, I'd say in our soul. The injury is stored in our soul, and law of attraction is reminding us. It's that little poke, and that's what this year has been about. Last year has been about COVID. Has been a massive case of law of attraction for everyone on all sides, from all the mainstream media followers to the biggest conspiracy theorists. Is they're all getting triggered.
Yeah.
But they're all fighting each other, and they're all projecting their emotions at each other rather than going, I feel like the government's running the whole thing and I don't have any say and any control over the whole situation, so I'm going to fucking fight them, rather than go, I feel like there's, oh my God, I'm going to lose everything. They're going to take us. They're going to make vaccine passports. Oh, imagine if they make vaccine passports. That's so sad. You need to get into the emotion you're feeling and not fight the system emotion, which is what everyone wants to do. And it's just it's the cover up, and it's escalating until everyone deals with their shit and is humble to it. Then the law of attraction will change for everyone, and we can maybe find the neutral ground in the middle somewhere.
Man, fantastic. I love what you said about confronting the not only the negative emotion, but also the negative story as well. Like you use the example of I'm poor, and you know, I like how you put it, that a lot of people would benefit more instead of telling yourself I'm rich, I have abundance, I have abundance, I have abundance. They'd benefit more from saying I'm poor as fuck, and then confronting that. What I'd add to that in terms of the my perspective on practice is that I see a pitfall there, in that most people have a really hard time differentiating between a permanent decision about identity and a story they're telling themselves about identity. And so the person who writes down that entry in their journal, I'm poor as fuck, with the intention of confronting that, I think it's really easy for people to get confused, and they see that as a permanent facet of their identity, and they decide that's true about themselves in the long term, and they allow that to define themselves.
What's already, I think it's already, they think it's true about themselves.
Yes.
Whether they know that or not. And that's where, like you said, it helps them to confront it. But you're right, they could just wallow in that for decades. Yes. And this is where practicing, that practice you talked about, where you recognize the emotions and be able to differentiate and discern, that is so powerful for people if they could do that. I think that's so great that you're teaching that to people. That's like no one else is really sharing that. You have, and this is where we talk about the soul, because this soul, people think about soul and it's hard to understand, or it's just religious talk, or it's biblical or whatever, but it's scientific language, but we have to get beyond the physical, understanding the physical material realm. This is science that we're discussing here. This for me is the most important science, because it's the science that can make people happier and feel more loving. So it's more important than the microscope shit, because that's not really got us anywhere closer to happiness and love and togetherness, has it? Lost my train of thought on that. So it's stored in the emotion, right? So the soul is where this belief is stored, and we have our mind is like an in-between vessel where we can hold ideas in our mind, and we can hold the truth and the error in our mind at the same time, and we can jostle and have a little comparison between the two things. But in our soul is cannot be hold both at the same time. The truth and the error cannot exist at the same time. Okay. So if we hold an error about some belief about the world, you have to, in your mind, see the new potential truth, compare the error, observe, and then eventually something might click and you go, fuck, oh my goodness. And we've probably all had that about you know, certain, I don't want to get too conspiracy into shit, but we've all had moments in our life where we see stuff like, it could be 9/11 for people, moon landing, it could be something in your everyday life, but something drops and you go, holy shit. And that's when the emotions starting to come and you're like, whoa, that's kind of painful to think that those guys actually know where, and that's where a lot of people will resist, because in their soul is the error, and the pain of the emotion of the truth coming in is too much, and so they'll just, no, you guys are silly, but it's in our mind where we can play between the two, and eventually through observation and our intellect and logical mind, that we can see something with enough rationality that it can change at the soul level. And it can be the example of I'm poor can be in the soul, and then we have to play with it maybe in front of us. Maybe it's what writing it down is our chance to play with it, observing our life. We're getting that reflected. But eventually you might come to a moment when you can't pay for dinner and you're sat at the dinner table and you've got no money in your bank account, and you just break down and cry in that moment. And that it might be eventually that will push that feeling to come through. And that's any unloving belief about ourselves like that is an injury, and it will allow us to heal that injury. But it's the way we've masked up these injuries is, yeah, there's a lot. I hope some of that made sense. Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny that you just used the term masked up, because that's what I was that's what I was going to address. Oh, can you hold on a second?
Sure.
My dog is crying for something. I'm not sure what. Pino, what's the matter, baby? Oh, you can let her chase it. There's a strange cat outside of our place, and she's upset about it. Oh, go get it. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So we're good. What I was going to add to that was that when you bring up the example of believing habitually that you're poor, and having that fundamental belief that you're carrying around about yourself for a while, you're having all of these behavioral, feeling, and thought reactions to that, to that belief. There's a thing that people do that you just brought up, which is trying to, either when we come into conflict with that belief, when we're shown that belief is true, or the belief becomes threatened or whatever, we have this thing that we do that I call narrative masking. And narrative masks are basically, what they do is they serve the purpose of covering up the bad emotional effects of believing one of these narratives, but we get to keep believing it at the same time. And maybe, oops. Oh, we're back. Okay.
That's spot on. That's exactly it.
And so, like, for example, if it's I'm bad, or sorry, I'm not safe because I'm poor, I don't have enough money, I'm not going to have enough resources, things are going to go badly for me if I don't get more money. Or it could be I'm bad because I'm poor, and that means that I'm a lazy person, or that I'm weak, or that I'm a coward. It could mean whatever. But if I tell myself that I have abundance, that I'm rich, and that I'm going to be rich, if I keep telling myself that I'm rich, and I only look at wealthy people on Instagram, and I only hang out with people who have more money than I do, and I try to, all of this may end up pushing me in the direction toward more wealth, but at the same time, it's actually, what I'm using it as is a cover up for that initial emotion and that initial narrative that I'm telling myself. So it allows me to fundamentally, deep down in the deepest part of, I guess what you would call your soul, I would call it the mind, perhaps, or whatever. But
subconscious, we can have that, because people call it subconscious. I call that the soul. And once I made that transition, it made a lot of things clear. So yeah, we can call it subconscious.
Sure. And so subconsciously, people who are, they get to subconsciously keep believing that, because that narrative serves a biological function for them. They think that there's motives for all of these narratives. They think that narrative, I'm bad, or I'm not safe because I'm poor, or I'm bad because I'm weak and therefore I'm poor, whatever it is. They believe that those stories that they're telling themselves and holding on to over time are protecting them from something, from the repetition of trauma, so that we don't keep repeating those negative emotional experiences that we had in the past. So So that's why there's that attachment to those narratives. And the masks that we use, for example, affirmations, gratitude journaling, mantras, whatever you're using to tell yourself that you're something you're not, these are helping us to cope with the bad or negative consequences and feelings of those narratives, but while we still get to keep our attachment to them.
Yeah. And that just shows the level of depth of the trauma and that we go to on a soul level to avoid the emotion. And and that is where that's the work. It's reversing everything that we're doing now. Literally, when I started doing this emotional work, and I don't know if you got the same, started to recognize the cover-up emotions and everything like that. It felt like I spent so much time learning to mask it, to cover it, to bottle it, to avoid it. And it started to reverse out the shell then. And I started to go, I'll have these incidents. And I've got a partner who's got a 4-year-old son. And there is no trigger on earth like a child. I swear. It's incredible. And if I'd met her a few years ago, it would have been so hard because he really triggers me so well. And it's not his fault. He's just reflecting something to me I'm not humble enough to feel. And because of this new understanding, I'm able to, most of the time, it's still a lot of work because triggers, when you're triggered, right? It doesn't matter. You can have all the intellectual intention of I'm going to be loving you want. And as soon as that triggers comes up, it changes for everyone.
Yes. And
take myself out of the situation. What am I feeling here? Why am I angry at him? He's his child. Like, why? I'm sad because I can't control it, but why do I need to control? He's not doing what I'm saying, but he's not meeting my addiction then. So it's like, I've got it. If you're around children, you know how often you have the opportunity. And that makes sense to me that like children are the teachers in a way to help us. Each generation has some children to help heal them because they can trigger them because they don't care about your emotional addiction or what you expect. They're true to themselves. They're sovereign, more sovereign than adults. We tread on eggshells around each other to not trigger our friends or be honest about how they look when they ask us stuff. White lies is a death sentence. White lies just lead these spirals of fake friendships and stuff. But just on that, we have incidences in our life, people, relationships, which are there to help us grow. And it's that like removing the mask and facing ourselves of like, it's not their fault that I feel this way, it's my fault. Oh my gosh, that's responsibility. That reverses everything and it can start the path to transformational growth, I think, at that point.
Yeah, and how contrary is that to some of the cultural narratives that are emerging now in our, that are becoming prevalent in contemporary culture? It's exactly the opposite of what we're hearing. We're hearing you're a victim of your environment, you're a victim of culture and circumstance and history, and and trigger warnings. Everybody needs to cater around your past traumas, and like you say, tiptoe on eggshells around each other's trauma. And but we on a more micro level than that, even just in interpersonal relationships between you and I. Let's say we're friends. We've known each other for years, and you go through a breakup, right? And you're having a hard time with it, and so you're like, oh, you want to meet for coffee and we can chat about it? I say, yeah, sure, man, let's go have a coffee. And we sit down and you're like, man, I'm really going through it. I feel like she broke up with me because she says it's because of this and this and that, but I really actually think that I'm ugly. I think she just couldn't stand being with me because she doesn't like, she thought that she could do better in terms of physical attractiveness, and I'm having a hard time with it. I feel like I'm not good enough. I won't be able to find another partner because I'm ugly. I've been struggling with this lately. And as your friend, I feel the pressure to comfort you and say like, nah, man, like I'd say like out of the, I only have like 15, 20 friends, but out of the 15, 20 friends I have, I'd say you're one of the more attractive people. I think you're good looking. You could get another girlfriend easy, And so now I become your narrative mask.
Yeah.
I helped you to cover up your coping with that trauma and confronting that emotion, And so we do that on a micro level with each other all the time.
Yeah. So much. It's everywhere, every day. It's how we live. And it's why, in a way, we are in, as a world, there's not, and you've been must have done the rounds yourself, been around the block. There's not that many teachers out there that really shine, that seem like that they stand out as knowing real truths. They've just found one thing that worked for a bit, and then they share it. Some people agree with them. They get, there are benefits to a lot of things, but there's people like Gabor Mate, I think, who seems to understand emotions quite well, and but there's really not that much. We're really, compared to how I believe humans and humanity could be, and it's this work, it's in these observations, it's in these white lies to our friends. When in that instance, it's not loving to lie to your friend to get them out, because you don't want them to feel that emotion in front of you or something, you know. So like, if they feel ugly, and I'm still new to the practice, so I can't give like a true answer of this would be the loving way to do it, but it would be more along the lines of, you know, feel that, like, you feel ugly. I can't say, oh no, you're not ugly. It's like, feel how you feel about it, you know. You can't say you're not ugly, but don't say, yeah, you are, although that will probably help them more, you know. You fucking ugly. Then
they panic, yeah.
You know, that could,
makes it worse.
You could tell your friend that, you know, next time you see me feeling something, dig your finger into it. Dig your finger, you know, that would help actually get to the other side of it, but it wouldn't necessarily be a loving approach, but it's more, it's better than
it might be.
It's how you do it, right? But it'd be more loving than a lie to avoid that feeling and that emotion, which will just bring about a girlfriend in 5 years' time that'll do the same thing, and you're like, 5 years has passed and nothing's changed, you know?
Right. Or like worse, you know, it's actually on the micro level, it's far worse than that, because it's not only at the end of the relationship that things go wrong, but it's actually throughout the relationship. The end of the relationship is just the symptom. So it's like
just a symptom, yeah.
So now you, after me having helped you mask your fear that you're ugly, you go into the next relationship that you have thinking, well, I'm ugly. And then that shapes the nature of the relationship. You know, you're worried constantly about her thinking that you're not as attractive as her. And maybe you're jealous when she talks to a more attractive guy or someone you think this, you know, and so it shapes all of these sort of micro interactions. But I mean, if you can develop enough trust with somebody, you know, to like, if you could say to somebody and you trusted them enough to be like, you know, when I'm like this, when I'm having a reaction, go ahead and poke your finger in because it'll help me. Then I think that's amazing to have relationships like that. But unfortunately, those are pretty rare. And so
and yet a child will do that, right?
Yeah, child by accident. Yeah.
They just know where the spots are. And they wouldn't sugarcoat it. They're just, no, I don't like you. If they don't like you, they'll tell you in that moment. You know?
I don't like you. You have a funny nose. Yeah, or something. They're like
totally.
That.
Yeah.
So what I've found is that it's a kind of a delicate balance for me, because professionally I've developed a system of dialectic where I talk with people and I kind of work this stuff out. So if somebody comes to me and I'm working with them as a willing client who they know that that's what they're in for excavating their narratives, then I have a system to walk them through of dialogue where I ask questions and they answer. And then I repeat back to them what they say and they answer some more. And then we work closer and closer to figuring out what that root emotion is and what that root trauma is and what that root narrative is that's causing these behavioral reactions and these feeling reactions that cause you to panic and think that you're, you know, things are really bad for you because you're ugly. Where's that coming from? So like, that's hard because as a professional practice, it comes across as condescending and it comes across as unnatural to try to do that in a casual context with people. And so like, it's a delicate art to be able to do that coaching in a casual way that doesn't come across as condescending and that is also at the same time actually helpful in a lasting way. It's challenging.
I can only imagine it being challenging. Yeah. But that's pioneering. Yeah, go on.
But for me, what I found is like the most useful questions that I can ask myself or ask somebody else who's going through the process is like, let's use the example that I created a moment ago of, we're having coffee, your girlfriend broke up with you, and you think that you're ugly, and that's the reason why she broke up with you. I would say something like, okay, so you think that you're ugly, and what's the worst part about being ugly? What does that mean for you? And that question, when you ask it repeatedly, what's the worst part about that? What's so bad about that for you? Then that's going to lead them to really closer and closer and closer to the root trauma, and to to what it is that they're actually afraid of. And when they get to that place, then like when they arrive at kind of like a succinct phrasing of that emotion and narrative that they're repeating to themselves over many, many years, that's when we can move on to a bigger part of the process, which is what are some of the behaviors, feelings, and thoughts that you have when you believe that's true about yourself. So when you believe that you're ugly, what kind of things do you do, think, and feel when you believe that you're ugly? And then you think about it, and I'm like, and people get stuck, they're like, well, I don't know. And I'm like, well, put yourself in a situation. Imagine a past event where you thought that you were ugly. What are some of the things that you did? What are some of the things that you felt? And easily they come up with lists of things. And then they look at this list and they're like, Jesus Christ, that's me? Oh yeah, that is me. That's the pattern that I'm repeating over and over. And then you say, okay, well, what are you expecting to get out of those feelings, thoughts, and behaviors?
So that list is actions. So that list is actions they did that were kind of unloving as a result of their feeling that way.
Yes, not only actions, but also like the way that they felt when they believed that was true.
Yeah.
The thoughts that came through their heads, but yes, also actions. Unloving actions would be a great way to describe it, because they're almost always unloving.
Unloving beliefs, unloving actions. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, yeah. And then from there, it's like, I ask them, well, what were you expecting to get out of that? Of those feelings, thoughts, and behaviors that you were doing in reaction to that narrative? What was the payoff for you? Because until we face the motives for those negative behaviors and thoughts and feelings, we're never going to actually, like you said, that's our personal truth. We're never going to actually be able to overcome them. So that's step 2. And then step 3 is, okay, once we've laid all that out on the table in front of us, and we can see, okay, here's the thing that I believe. Here's the deeper fear. Here's the reactions that I'm having. Here's what I'm expecting to get out of those reactions. We see all that laid out on the table. The common reaction is like, oh my God, that's not getting me what I want. And that's the primary realization. And then the second realization, which is the last part, is, oh, well, if I release my emotional attachment to this narrative, what would be possible for me in all of those scenarios? What would have been possible for me in that relationship? What's possible for me now? How can I change my feeling? How can I change my behavior? How can I change what becomes available to me when I release that attachment? And people just fucking, they blow wide open when you ask that question. It's incredible. They come up with it on their own. Like they'll list 100 things. They're like, oh, I could have done this, and I could do this, and I would feel differently this way. And it's like, it's amazing. And so the main point, whether I'm working with someone professionally or casually having a conversation, is to find the most natural way down that path of inquiry that I can. And I just try to
That's
use,
great.
Yeah.
It's like a roadmap. Like you help them map it out. You reverse engineered it to give them a roadmap of that personal truth about themselves, to see the consequence and hopefully feel something about what they've been doing to themselves and to others as a consequence of those false beliefs that they held in themselves about themselves. So I think that's right. A really solid practice, yeah. And what it seems to be is, if with the emotional work, if you feel and release that emotion, you might not even be able to identify the root source. But people seem to say that once they feel that, then the memory comes back of what caused it, but they weren't able to access the memory in the first place. So sometimes you can use memories to get that away, or sometimes the emotions will unlock the memory afterwards.
Yeah, there's many access points. We can approach it from many angles, and you can do that through movement. Suddenly you're moving in a certain way, you do some kind of action, and like an emotion comes up from your past that you hadn't confront it in
Yeah.
10 years, you know, or a
Yeah.
memory comes up. So there's many access points. And I guess what I try to do with practice is to create as many of those access points and indicators as possible. And so like the negative emotion list that I created, the fright, fear, anger, sad, pain list, those serve as indicators as well for those trauma narratives. So whenever I feel fright, fear, anger, sad, or pain, or I'm reflecting on my day or my week or my month or my year, and I think back and it's like, oh, well, that was a strong emotion. That was a strong emotion of fear. I wonder where that was coming from. And then I use that dialectic process of like, what was the worst part about that? Okay, well, what is that? What's so bad about that? What does that mean for me if that's true? And I just keep going through that process until I get closer and closer.
Can I ask how you separated fright and fear?
Yeah, for me, it was like a feeling, like fright for me is immediate. It's like a scare. It's a adrenaline jump. That's fright for me. Like you jump off something really, you know very well, you jump off something really high, and that leap of adrenaline into your chest. Whereas fear is very different feeling for me. It's more, it's more like an unsettled feeling in my stomach. It's like worry. It's like a longer, more sustained, more anxious feeling.
Yeah. But if we were to categorize those emotions that you mentioned, I would say that fright and sadness are kind of they're like humble emotions.
Okay.
They're the initial emotions.
Interesting.
Anger would be a less humble emotion, and then fear would be maybe somewhere in the middle of that, I'd say. And so it's like the more, like you said, like you kind of agreed, anger is a cover up for fear or whatever, or it could be the fright. The more we can be in those emotions of sadness or grief, fright, like there's yeah, I just find that interesting. I like that you were able to discern between fright and fear, and I was just thinking how because if we can start to discern humble emotions from cover-up emotions, which I guess we kind of already discussed at the start, that really helps us to get to the root of a lot of things, you know. And like a child crying, you see them like shoulders in and their heads down, and they'll like there's a real humble sadness to some children, and then some children are like a tantrum where they're up and they're banging like that. That's like an addiction not being met. That's like an unhumble emotion. Yeah, that's anger, right? And so it's like the difference between the humble child and the angry one, and it's like somewhere along the way we lost the ability to just feel sad for what it is, not a poor me sadness, but just like actually just overwhelmed with that emotion. And that on that point, that's what one of the keys mentioned. So what I've studied to come to these understandings that you've studied Nietzsche and your own exploration, and I'm not sure what else you've run into, but divine truth is what it's called. On YouTube is what I studied. And it just seems from everything, all the spiritual things, everything, it just seems the most accurate. The language is quite simple. You can observe it in life. Children can kind of understand these concepts and understand emotions quite well. But yeah, I'd just say that it's divine truth. And that was what I was going to say. So our ability to be overwhelmed with emotion is what creates room for the growth. So we're quite scared as adults, especially, to feel overwhelmed with emotion. It's quite daunting. Even good emotions sometimes, especially men, are scared to like really let it out. And so that's something to work towards, is to try and allow ourselves to be more overwhelmed with emotion and not fight and resist, or recognize that, to allow us to be consumed in that moment, in that emotion. And we've all had those good cries in our life where you felt so much better afterwards, even if it was the end of the world cry. And then afterwards you felt, oh, I just needed a good cry. And it's like that, the more we can try to tap into that overwhelmment is what allows us to expand and grow.
Yeah, for sure. That's a missing piece of the puzzle for a lot of people. going, just tracking backwards for a second to what you said about there being, you say like humble, and then what's the other category? Cover up?
So there's suppress emotions, resist emotions, and distract from emotions. So,
okay.
Although I guess that's, so I say cover up, but resistance emotion.
Yeah, but I liked what you said about fright and sad being the two humble emotions. It's something that I hadn't really thought very deeply about before, and how those two are very different from the rest of the emotions.
They're more roots, aren't they? Before you've yeah.
In a way they are. I'd have to, to be honest, I'd have to give that some private thought and work through that over a couple of weeks. Sure. To really to get to the bottom of that. But thank you for bringing that up. Very cool. But what was the, before I jump back?
Sorry, so I was talking about overwhelmed with emotions.
Yeah. Okay. So I think that's a huge missing piece of the puzzle, and allowing yourself to become overwhelmed with emotion and allowing that to be part of the healing process. And then also I'd add on top of that, that there's this whole part of not pseudo, I guess it is pseudo, but also new age spiritualism culture, where now people are going to these workshops almost like as emotional masturbation. Like they really want to just feel as much as possible, and they're going to get triggered, to get pushed, to get those emotions risen up to the surface. You see this a lot in like plant medicine culture too. People are going to have these kind of transcendental emotional experiences, which like you said, and like I just agreed, is very useful in context. I think it's a huge missing piece of the puzzle that a lot of people are under practicing and under experiencing. But at the same time, I see that culture being not enough on its own. That needs to be integrated, in my experience, with a more systematic, long-term practice of introspection and understanding the patterns that emerge as well. Because sometimes having that, this is one of the things that you said in our chat that I disagreed with fundamentally, is that the having one of these emotional experiences where you feel it very, very strongly, and you maybe even cry a lot, or you vomit, or you purge the emotion and you confront it in a very real way. Sometimes even that is not enough. Sometimes people still return. They still return to the old pattern, to the old belief, to the old narrative, and they keep propagating it in their lives.
Yeah. Well, I think certainly on plant medicines that it can return. I don't know if you meant in that sense on plant medicine or just in general anyway, but certainly I think plant medicine, because you're not in both. Yeah. The less you're in your sober mind and conscious or present, the less it's going to have an effect in your conscious life, I think. But yeah, certainly people can express emotions and nothing changes. But I think it's a real precise practice that's going to take us years, decades to get good at, and yet we could all do it as children, but society doesn't feed it, our friends don't feed it, our spiritual practices don't always feed it. Right. A lot of meditation and just sitting there with no thought is not getting closer to it necessarily. It's just it's in the law of attraction. It's in our day-to-day life. It's the tools are there if we can practice using them, I think.
Yeah, I think that's another really crucial point. I like that what you said about meditation being like oriented around not thinking, which I think is the way that most people conceptualize meditation. That conception of meditation is also not getting us closer to an integrated introspective practice in our everyday life when we're walking around eyes open, having relationships, having communication with people, getting triggered. It's in a way kind of removed from that applied reality. So like people get confused and they think that meditation is going to offer them some kind of lasting emotional transformation in their daily life where they are having these eyes open experiences, and it doesn't always translate, and then they're confused. They're like, well, I went on a 10-day Vipassana, so why don't I feel better? Why did I keep going back to the same patterns 3 days later after I came back, or 1 week later. And I think that distinction that you made would help clear that up for a lot of people.
Yeah, and like you said, it's the ability to integrate it all, and it's the integration, isn't it? It's not and that's exactly what I did. I did a 35-day water only fast because I wanted to do it all in one go, solve all my eating issues, digestive problems, history, everything. I wanted to. Why not just rather than do these little fasts? It's easier just to do it all in one go.
Yeah.
Come back to life.
I'll just blast myself in the face. Yeah.
Exactly, and it didn't really solve anything in terms of food-wise or what I expected. But I had to do that to learn and know. We all have. I really encourage people to experiment, and anything that you're passionate about or you're intrigued by, just dive down that rabbit hole and get as fast through it. Go through it and learn what you can and see what's at the bottom of it. And that's one thing. I just follow my passions so regularly and let myself get absorbed, even if it means it's the opposite of the last passion. I went from vegan to carnivore,
sure,
and I learned so much in each of them. And often it will bring you back to the middle path, and that's what Buddha told us. If we didn't want to do anything, Buddha said that. The middle path is the middle way, or whatever. But you don't know that until you experience it, and so it is the experience of it. But yeah, finding it's the integrative practices that truly what make the transformation, and it's the regular or the top ups or the little bits here and there, but not the blast in the face, as you called it.
Man, there's a lot that we could go into here, but I think we're going to run out of time on the IG Live, and probably that's more than people can digest already. So
I think an hour is good. I think an hour is good for a chat.
Great. Yeah, it's great. Thank you so much, Tim. Like I feel like what we've said here, if people really listen to it, a lot of what you said and a lot of what I said can be extracted and really applied. Because I think what we're running into right now, like you brought up with the pandemic, I didn't really address that, but like you brought up with the pandemic, people are in a very unique opportunity right now to find introspective practice in a way that perhaps they wouldn't have been pushed to otherwise. And I think with the right approach and perhaps some really good systematic guidance, and yeah, like I think a lot of what's preventing people from consistent practice as well is that they also they put too much pressure on themselves to make it something. And actually, like when you get down to the nitty gritty of introspective practice and moving through these traumas and emotions, it just feels great no matter what dose that you do. There's a confrontational aspect to it for sure, but in the end, it's what feels hard and what feels bad about this kind of practice is not the practice itself. What feels bad is our unrelenting attachment and wanting to hold on to these past trauma patterns, and
that's spot on. And that's what you say. It's not the truth that's bad. It's the error that exists as it leaves. That's
right.
That's bad.
Yeah. Yeah. The truth feels great.
Yeah.
It's relieving.
Once you're not emotionally attached to what. Yeah. As you say.
So, man, thank you so much. I really appreciate this. This went even better than I had hoped. Yeah,
I'm so glad you reached out and took the foresight to create this and make this happen. I'll just say that anyone from my followers, check out Devin and reach out. It seems like he's created some really powerful structure that could really, I really back what he's doing there to help people transform. And then if you want to check out more, everything I've shared, I've really learned from Divine Truth, as I mentioned. So check out Divine Truth on YouTube. He's a great teacher there.
Awesome. Yeah. Anything that you want to say to people who are following me to help them find more about what you're doing?
No, I'm still exploring. I don't really have any answers.
Awesome.
I'll point them to Divine Truth, and that's really the best. They can go straight to the source, and that one.
Okay. Awesome, man. Thank you so much. Somebody just commented, looking forward to part 2. It's a possibility for sure.
Yeah, let's do it. When the right subject, we'll have a subject and target that. That'd be great.
Great. Yeah, because I think there's a lot more overlapping interests that we could address. So awesome, man. Yeah. Well, I'll let you go. Thanks so much for your time, Tim. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, everyone that listened. Really appreciate you, Devin. Great chat.
Bye.